I can have everybody take their seats, we're going to go ahead and begin. My name is Amanda Sutcliffe-Jones. I am the Communications Director for Community Services Associates. I welcome you to the 2017 Community Services Associates and Association of Sea Pines Plantation Property Owners annual meetings. In addition to the over 280 people we have in attendance in this room currently, we also are joined by over 60 participants from our first ever live annual meeting webinar, as well as our live conference call. So we welcome you guys as well to that call. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned, this is the first time we're offering those webinar services to our community, so we're pleased to have those people who could not have previously join our annual meeting since they could not attend in person in Hilton Head Island. A few announcements before we begin. The ASPPPO and CSA annual meetings. From a fire safety perspective, if there is an emergency, I'm sure Toby would appreciate me saying this from a safety perspective, please use the illuminated exit signs to exit. We see them here, as well as over in that location, and then over here as you exit towards the back of the building. Questions from the annual meeting from those attending in this room will be taken after the adjournment of not only the annual ASPPPO meeting, but also the CSA meeting. So we will hold all meetings until both meetings have become adjourned. If you are in person and in attending the meeting, we ask that you come up to these microphones. They'll be placed here, over here as well. If you are attending the meeting via webinar and or conference call, we cannot take those questions from the webinar or conference call, so we invite you to ask any questions that you may have and send them to us via email at amandaj@csaseapines.com. That way we can address those questions from those who are attending via webinar and or conference call. But again, for those who are in person, we will take questions after the conclusion of the CSA meeting, and microphones will be set up at front. You will have to approach the microphones so the question can be heard through the webinar itself. Without further ado, I'd like to also remind us that following the Q&A sessions, there will be an hour-long social reception. It will be held back outside on the pool deck, so we encourage you guys to stay for some food and beverages. I'd like to welcome Charlie Miner, ASPPPO President, to the stage, and he will begin the 2017 Annual ASPPPO Board Meeting. Charlie?
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you all for being here, including those on the webinar. This is quite a turnout for us. The first question I have is for Secretary Dan Westerbeck. Do we have a quorum?
Mr. President, we do have a quorum for today's ASPPPO meeting.
Thank you. The agenda. There we go. I will announce announce the board members and the nominating committee, and then I'm going to do a quick update on the referendum. When I do the update on the referendum, I think it's important to know that we plan meetings for the community. We're allowing an hour and a half to 2 hours for each of those meetings. So in the 10 or 15 minutes that I have on this, I'm not going to go into that kind of depth. I'm simply going to give you a brief overview of where we stand and what the next steps are. So at this point in time, I'd like to announce our nominating committee. There we go. According to the bylaws, the president of ASPPPO is a member of the nominating committee. That's me. Beverly Searle will join us, and Dave Borghese will be chairman of that committee. And I would encourage you that if you are interested in serving, the approach that ASPPPO has taken in the past is that if you are a dues-paying ASPPPO member and you wish to run for office, you will be nominated. So lots of opportunities to do that. I'd also like to recognize our board members. First, I'd like to recognize Michael Tucker, the retiring board member, but he's continuing on with CSA. Our last election elected 3 board members: Mark Griffith, myself, Charlie Miner, and Dick Matthews. Our second-year board members, Barry Barth, Dave Borghese, and Beverly Searle. And our third-term board members, J.R. Richardson, Rich Spear, and Dan Westerbeck. Would you all just stand for a minute or wave your hands so that we all can recognize who you are? Thank you. There we go. Okay. So our board of directors for 2017 is there. Let me do a quick update on where we stand with the referendum, or just waiting for the slide to come up. Okay, there we go. On the future of sea pines, and I think this is truly a historic moment in the future of sea pines. A couple of years ago, the resort approached ASPPO with a request to add additional rooms to the inn at Harbortown. They have gone further to say now that they are planning to spend between $70 and $100 million to upgrade their facilities and Harbortown itself. The reason they asked ASPPO for approval is that some time ago there was a court settlement which gave ASPPO the approval rights over any additional rooms at Harbortown. And so that is the primary subject of the referendum. In order to pass a referendum, it requires 75% plus one, I guess, of the voting residential property owners. So if you're a residential property owner, whether you're a member of ASPPO or not, the referendum requires a 75% vote. So a high hurdle, high standard to pass that. Next. What can this referendum mean to property owners? Well, I think we've all seen what has happened with the resort over the last few years with the beach club, the great improvements to the golf course, and the other incredible improvements that they have made to their facilities. And so this is one more in a series of their long-range plan to elevate Sea Pines to a 5-star, 5-diamond status. That means it would be among the very best in the United States. I think there are only 75 in the United States. That would put us up in the same category as Pebble Beach, Kiowa, and other famous places. We believe that those improvements will have a dramatic impact on increasing property values. We have studies which we will share with you that demonstrate how that has happened in similar communities like this. In addition, the resort has agreed to provide us with a grant or payment of at least $1 million for general improvements to the Sea Pines plantation. Those improvements would be decided upon by the ASPPO board and would be the general type of improvement. They could be a number of things. Probably the most notable improvement that we've made over the past few years was Tower Beach. So that would be that type of an improvement. We also agreed that the ASPPO or the residents would be able to put forward referendums in the future. And there's a number of unfinished business items within the plantation that will require additional referendums in the future. As we deal with those things, ASPPO and the residential property owners have the right to put forward a referendum so long as it does not do any material impact to the resort. The resort will also increase its annual assessment. They currently pay 0.5% of their annual revenue. That'll go to 0.75%. That'll be several $100,000. During the discussions that we had, ASPPO, which survives on $35 a year from you, incurred expenses in the neighborhood of $150,000 in doing the various pieces of research that was necessary to move forward on this. Sea Pine, or SPR, Sea Pines Resort, will reimburse us for that expense. There's been a long-standing issue within the community about whether or not the Forest Preserve should be leased or should be owned by the Forest Preserve Foundation. To put that issue to bed, we have agreed that the resort will deed approximately 300 acres of wildlife habitat zone to the Forest Preserve Foundation, and that the balance of the land in there will be jointly owned in proper percentage, so that 67% of the total Forest Preserve is owned by the Foundation. In addition, they have agreed to some additional funding, ongoing funding. We're still in the process of calculating how much that will be, but it will be significant, and that will allow the Forest Preserve to move forward on its own to make the kinds of improvements and maintenance to that that it desperately needs. Then there are the farmers. They always are concerned about what our future is, and the resort has agreed that they will add a 10-year lease extension so that those of you who are gardeners in that area don't have to worry about some development moving that away. There are some non-referendum issues that have been on the table for some time, and those include the gate fee and the commercial assessment. We have gained the pledged support from the resort to support both of those items, and those are now moving through the normal process of business. I think I covered them all there. Okay. So I mentioned that there will be a community forum, and our current plan is to have the first of those forums on May 30th. There'd be one in the morning at 9:30 in the morning and another one at 6:30 in the evening. There are a lot of detailed questions, a lot of tangent issues that come out of this referendum, and I know that many of you are interested in a lot of those things which aren't necessarily a part of the referendum, but they affect our lifestyle here in Sea Pines. So that will be an ample opportunity for those questions to be explored and answered. Those will also, as Amanda said, like this program, they will be available on webinar, and we will also tape those sessions so that they're available for viewing by anybody who can't attend. I think that concludes. Yes. Pardon? I didn't get the minutes approved. Let's see, could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting? And a second? In favor? Aye. Opposed? Passed. At this point in time, I'll turn it over to Rich Spear, who's our treasurer, to cover our financial background.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm not going to refer to 2016. It's in your annual report, except to say that we did significantly better than we had budgeted. We had budgeted a loss of about $86,000 because we had assumed a referendum and some additional legal expenses. In fact, last year was a loss of about $11,000, and that led to the approval to raise it from $30 to $35 for our annual fees. First slide, please. Overall, ASPPPO basically represents 1% of what we all pay in combined budget for CSA. So to put this in perspective, our total year-to-date in 2017 versus 16, about $118,000 in total revenues compared to $107 last year. This reflects the $5 increase that we said before. We do have a little bit of license income and a little bit of investment income. Investment income's down a little bit because we liquidated some investments to have the liquidity to deal with the issues that we've been dealing with in the resort conversations. Our expenditures year-to-date in the first quarter are about $30,000. That includes about $3,000 in legal expenses, significantly less than we had thought we were going to spend, and that compares to the $36,000 in the first quarter or so of last year. At the end of this quarter, we had $490,000 in net assets in investments and liquid checking money market accounts. compared to about $484,000 last year. Again, we collect our fees up front during the front of the year, first quarter primarily, and the balance of the year is associated with expenses. Those programming expenses are dominated by the land use monitor that we have, some insurance fees, and in past year, a couple of years, legal fees, but not so far year to date, as I said before. And support expenditures really represents the rent we pay and support costs we get from CSA for what we do. So overall, as you see here, net assets, $413,000 at the beginning of 16, $401 now, and $490 as we speak. Next slide. In terms of our assets right now, we have about $527,000 in total assets. As you see here, primarily cash, we're still liquid. We will convert some of that to investments as we have certainty as to the outcome of the referendum and things that we have going on right now. Prepaid expenses are negligible. We've got some advance by CSA, about $37,000 in terms of liabilities, and those are just the normal expenses that they pay on our behalf that we reimburse them for. Overall, undesignated, about $507,000 in assets, most of that in investments, and accumulated comprehensive income loss about $17,000. So when you get down to the net, about $527,000 right now compared to $490 last year at the end of the first quarter. Next slide. One of the concerning things that we mentioned last year and continue to mention there is only about 70-odd% of property owners are ASPPPO members. And this $35 a year is to support ASPPPO, which is the sole organization that is here to protect property owners' individual rights. CSA represents a collective of the resort, commercial interest, and residential owners, but ASPPPO is our only body for $35 a year. I used to say, as I said in previous years, that maintaining the level of liquidity we did might not be necessary. I've come to change my mind on that. I believe it's extremely important to have the ability to defend and secure the rights of property owners and to be able to deal on a level playing field in those conversations. But as we see, our membership has dropped from 3,923 to 3,659. I would encourage you that are here that are CSA members, as all of us are, to consider how valuable that $35 for a year is to be a member of ASPPPO. With that, I'd like to end the financial questions. I'll, of course, later be available to answer any questions anybody may have in detail. And I would also like to, if it's okay with you, Charlie, to adjourn the ASPPPO meeting and suggest that Mark come up as, do I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Thank you, Rich. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Griffith. I'm the board chairman of the Community Service Administration. As required by our governance documents, we're required to hold an annual meeting once a year, and as such, I call the 2016 annual meeting to order. Firstly, I'd like to confirm by our secretary, Carolyn Adams, that we do in fact have a quorum. We do have a quorum. Thank you. Our first order of business is our minutes of our 2016 annual meeting, which was held in May 9th of 2016. Those meetings were included in your annual report that was mailed, as well as been posted on the website. May I have a motion to approve those, please? Second. Any comments or discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. As with ASPPPO, one of my obligations is to inform you of the 2017 nominating committee chairman and members for the Class A residential board seats. This year, David Borghese will be our chairman. He will also be served by Charlie Miner and Barry Barth. The Class B commercial board seats and will be the nominating committee will consist of Bob Sowers as chairman, along with Mark King and Bob Gossett. Should you be interested in standing for election, You need to submit your qualifications to the CSA offices on or before the 1st of August of 2017. Interviews by the nominating committees will then be held during the months of August and September. Assuming a nomination, you will then participate in a candidates forum in November of 17, and then ballots will be distributed, and we will announce a result in December of 17. I might note it's also possible to be a candidate by petition. If you choose and wish not to go through the nominating process, residential director is required a petition with signatures by 50 residents, and on the commercial Class B by 3 commercial interests. And those must be submitted to the nominating committee prior to October 1st of 2017. We have no board members leaving the board this year, as the 3 candidates for election to Class A and the candidates for Class B were all reelected. Those include myself, Michael Tucker, and Charlie Miner, and as a Class B, Mark King. Now on to committees. Executive Committee. I chair the Executive Committee. Michael Tucker is my vice chair. Charlie Miner, ex officio. Dave Borghese, treasurer. Carolyn Adams, secretary. And Don Sigmund, appointed by the board at large. Committees. This is going to be rather long because there are a lot of committees that serve this community, so bear with me. Communications Committee is chaired by Barry Barth. The Finance Committee is chaired by David Borghese. The Gate Entry Committee is chaired by Carrie Corbett. Governance by Richard Spear. The Long Range Strategic Planning Committee is chaired by Michael Tucker. I chair the Executive Committee. The Joint CSA ASPPPO Short-Term Rental Committee is jointly chaired by Beverly Searle and Bill Johnson. The Maintenance, Enhancement, and Major Projects Committee is chaired by J.R. Richardson. Nominating Committee, as I mentioned, is chaired by David Borghese. Safety and Security is chaired by Michael Tucker. I'll continue. This is all, by the way, this is all posted on the website, but I'll go through this once again, or again for you. Forest Preserve Advisory Committee is chaired by Ted Allenbach. Six Oak Cemetery Advisory Committee is chaired by David Borghese. Communications Trolley Gate Committee chaired by Bob Gossett. Communications Marketing Gate Committee by Mark King. Governance Sea Pines Covenant Modifications, Rich Spear. Governance Board Orientation and Overseas Process, Rich Spear. Governance CSA Board Leadership Program, Rich Spear. Governance Safety Security Review and Planning, Rich Spear. Governance ARB ARC Review, Rich Spear. And then Governance CSA Board Member Nomination and Oversight Process, Rich Spear. And the Gate Fee Subcommittee is Bill Johnson and Bob Gossett. And guess what? I got more. Our ARB liaison is J.R. Richardson. The governance liaison is Scott Richardson. The Greenwood Gate Renovation Plan Task Force is Michael Tucker. And the Joint CSA ASPPPO Traffic Task Force, Paul Crunkleton. And last but not least is the Legal Affairs Task Force, which I chair. So as you can see, there are a lot of committees and a lot of task force involved in operating the community. I want to talk to you a few minutes about goals and objectives. Last year, we reviewed a number of goals that we had put forward for the previous couple years. A number of those carried over. In fact, there were 5 that carried over into this current year. The first of which was to complete the reserve study on our assets and infrastructures. That has now been completed, and a reserve policy has been adopted by the board. The second one was to evaluate our gate functionality and to develop a plan to improve access. That continues to be studied. As I mentioned, there's a task force in place, and I'm hopeful in the coming months that we'll come to some sort of a conclusion as to how we can more expeditiously get you residents as well as our visitors into the plantation. So that's ongoing. Improved conditions of our waterways and lagoons. That is also ongoing. I think we've made great strides. Matthew set us back a bit, but we've completed a hydrology study. We know the conditions. We know what we need to do. We're in for some permitting with the town and the jurisdictions that that we have to be responsible to. But I think we're making some headway on our waterways and our lagoons. Raise the bar on the level of care for our entry corridors. As you have seen, we're doing some substantial improvements along Greenwood Drive as a result of, well, first it was needed, and then Matthew eliminated a lot which was along that corridor. So we've got to make an investment, I think, in the neighborhood of $400,000 for irrigation, planting, mulching, sod, and I think once that's complete, it's something that we can be proud of. But there's more of that will come on our major arteries within the plantation. We added 4 additional goals this past year. It's to establish a communications policy and committee to improve property owner communications, and we have completed that. And I compliment Amanda and her group. I think that the communication that we all received during the aftermath of Matthew and the job that she and her people have done needs to be applauded. Thanks. Another goal was to evaluate assessment levels of the resort, assessment levels of commercial, as well as we residents, seed a revenue task force, and evaluate as well our expenses, and develop a 5-year plan to look forward as to how we best improve and manage this plantation. The 5-year operating plan is due to be completed, I believe, within the next quarter. And the revenue task force has met and has some views on what we need to do to enhance our revenue stream. If this referendum that Charlie's talked about does in fact pass, that will mean substantial increased revenues to CSA. If we can achieve some escalation in our gate fees, that will also enhance revenues to CSA. And with that, I think undoubtedly, as I mentioned a year ago, we'll probably be coming back to you also for some increase, but we recognize we got to get these other areas fixed first. The next item that was on the agenda was to work with the resort to help them accomplish the improvements necessary to create their 5-diamond, 5-star rating. And as you know, as Charlie has discussed, that's in process. As you can see, we've been very busy. And there are 2 things that we've added to this year's agenda. Some of those items I've talked about are ongoing and are not yet complete. Those 2 items are to work with ASPPPO and the resort to administer an efficient property owner referendum. And then lastly, to reseat the long-range strategic planning committee. And that plan was passed a little over 3 years ago, Michael. And it's the right thing to do is to periodically pull that out and dust it off and look at and take an update. So that is happening. And I think that we're on pace to put forward a new long-range plan within the coming probably 6 months. And with that, that's my report. Turn this over to Brett. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. My name is Brett Martin. I'm president of CSA. I'd like to take this moment, if I could, ask all the staff members present to stand up. David, Jared, Toby, Amanda, Victoria. It's been my privilege and honor to work with these folks over the last almost 3 years now since I've been here, but specifically over the last 7 months since Hurricane Matthew. I think the effort that went forward, not only from a communications perspective, but also from an effort and organization and a commitment to the community has been outstanding by these staff members, and I just wanted to express my appreciation for each and every one of them. Thank you, guys. With that, I wanted to talk a little bit about our business plan coming up this year and what we're trying to get accomplished. As you know, the board adopted a long-range strategic plan back in February of 2015, and several components of that we've been working on diligently since that. Some very successful things that have happened up front, and two of the key strategic objectives were related to our financial sustainability and understanding our commitments to the community, what we already have to get accomplished, as well as things that we would like to get accomplished. Second to that was to improve our relationships inside the community through better communication, community involvement, and engagement. Those two things we thought really needed to be done well and be done well first. And as Mark mentioned, we recently completed our reserve study. We've also completed a detailed hydrology study of our stormwater system. We've done the initial plans for our 5-year operating objectives, and also are now rolling in a 5- and 7-year plan for all of our capital and major repairs and replacements, and then possible enhancements moving forward. To be able to do those, we need to understand our requirements, and we've worked hard and long on getting that understanding and getting it under our belt. And I'm very pleased that we have really completed and got it adopted as a reserve policy, the status where we are today. We will be bringing forward more information as we go through this year about some of these possible enhancements, including the plans for those, the visual plans that might be attainable and might improve things like entrance at the gate, like our landscaping and our landscaping conditions, the forest preserve. For those of you who were not aware of it, part of our long-range strategic plan identified the forest preserve as one of our greatest assets, and to develop that and to make it a better place and a better experience for all. And then the possibility of a larger and broader community center. So all of those are in our objectives, and we need to see what the financial picture looks like. And we've done a lot of work to do that, and thanks to both our operating team and Victoria and our finance committee to look at what we need to have set aside to make sure we meet the needs of the community going forward. After we do that, we've got to communicate it. We need to bring it back out to you and survey you and ask for your input. This board is committed to getting your input, which is why we've developed such a comprehensive communication plan and strategy to make sure we understand what you want and what your priorities are. We'll be bringing our ideas back to you as we develop those, and to get your feedback on what you think is good, what you think is consistent with Sea Pines, and what you think is not. And we're looking forward to doing that this year, later this summer, and into the fall, as we talked about fixing the gate or making improvements to the gate, as well as some of our landscape, which we have already shared on our primary corridor and what that looks like, and I'll be showing a brief slide on that later. Mentioned the community-wide partnership, reaching out. You know, our communications efforts with Amanda on board, and now we have an additional staff person, Jean, on board to help us develop that and reach out to not just the individual property owners one-on-one, but also to the various regimes that are within Sea Pines. Dan Westerbeck has been the president of the POA's Presidents Association, and we are working hard with that group to make sure that we get that information out to all of our residential property owners. As you know, we have a lot of non-residents who are property owners. We have a lot of investment property, and those are all represented through those individual regimes, and our efforts to work to get that information to them has been at the forefront of our communications plans and coordination. We want to get your feedback on surveys. So we have conducted, since I have been here, 5 surveys. We have another survey that's coming out very shortly that will go to the population. I'm not sure how many people we're surveying, but it's going to be a large percentage of the residential property owners on just exactly what's wrong with the gate. What is your concern? I've heard so many different things, from exiting and trying to get out Sea Pine Circle, to trying to turn left onto Greenwood from coming out of Harris Teeter, to just waiting on people who are in the wrong lane. And we want to try to get that fixed. So that's a high priority, and we think we've got some good ideas. Once we get those ideas on paper and drawn out and understand the measurements of what that may impact, we'll get that back out to you so you can see what our thoughts are, what our ideas are, what the engineers say and what the traffic guys say, and let you also weigh in on that as well so we can get your thoughts on it. Website planning. We've launched our new website that came out just a couple weeks ago. Hopefully many of you have gotten out to it. We are already in our plans for phase 2, which will be a more interactive website, which will allow you to do things like submit your gate pass requirements if you have a gate pass, and do that online, as well as hopefully pay your bill shortly. So those 2 components are coming up, and we'll be adding to that, as well as continuing to develop our communications policy so that we can utilize digital communications to stay in touch with you better. We've also engaged a firm to help us get better, to really look at us. We work really hard to try to communicate, but we know there's other ideas out there, and we want to get those ideas in front of you and find out from you how you would like to give us input, not just how we would like to receive it. So we'll be going out with that and trying to engage the community in different ways. We do get a lot of openings on our email, but we don't get a 100% by any stretch, and we don't anticipate we will. In our last survey, we got about 33% of all properties were responded to our last survey. We'd like to move that number up significantly, and we think we can do that and start to improve that through better engagement and getting you involved, and also providing you with the answers that you're looking for. Our third strategic objective was about the lifestyle. How do we continue and improve the lifestyle? And I've heard a lot talk about traffic, and that it is a negative impact, especially at the gate. And that's something we've got to address. That's come out as our highest priority, but there are other priorities as well. We also want to improve the way Sea Pines looks. How does the landscaping look after 50 years of going out and mowing and blowing, but not necessarily planting and enhancing? We want to do more of that so that it feels like a world-class experience for the property owners. We also want to look at the forest preserve, as I mentioned, and look at what we can do there. Go one further. I'll come back. This is a plan that was developed a couple of years ago. We're looking for money. We had some money originally planned to start this plan, and unfortunately Matthew came along and kind of took some of those funds away. We had to do some beach renourishment and work on cleaning up the beach with some of the boardwalks and issues that were out there that were floating around and drifting around out there, and that took up a good portion of the initial funding that we wanted to start on the forest preserve development. Amanda, can you go back one slide? Developing the landscape for the major corridors. We've got a detailed plan for the Greenwood Gate to Plantation Drive on Greenwood Drive already in place, not funded yet, but we've got the ideas. The MEMP committee, or the Maintenance Enhancements and Special Projects Major Projects Committee has been working on this now since we did our landscape survey a couple of years ago and determined what kind of landscaping you'd like. And I hope many of you have had the opportunity to look at least some of the initial things that have happened as a result of Matthew and the repairs that have happened along Greenwood Corridor. We have more of those coming, and you'll be seeing some of that idea and those concepts as we move forward. There we go. Go to the last one. Good. The last strategic objective is governance. Developing incomplete comprehensive plans for future implementation of the proposed strategic initiatives. Oops, that's number 3. I need to go to 4. There we go. Okay. So we're presenting educational forums. In February of this year, I don't know how many of you were able to attend, but we didn't have great turnouts for them. Maybe the subject matter was a little bit boring, but we started to talk to owners about what we do on a daily basis, some of the things that we have to do, some of the things that we're constrained by, as well as what our objectives are. The different entities that we operate, like the Forest Preserve, like Six Oaks Cemetery, those things that are all come under the hat of CSA, and then the services we provide to ASPPPO and to the ARB so that their business can run and be reported on by their staffs as well as their board. Survey you, survey the property owners. Continue to get your feedback and input on key initiatives that we're working on. Like what we did with the landscape preference survey, we determined what you liked, not what we liked or what we thought would go forward. We showed you pictures of examples of natural or maintained or refined different types of landscaping, and you weighed in on it. And that helped set our plan out. And I hope what you're seeing now is a good result from that plan. But if it isn't, we're sure you're going to let us know as we go forward and get additional feedback from you. And the last thing is to collect that community input and report it to you so you understand what the other property owners. If you saw the results of the survey that we did a year and a half ago, and I hope you all have, you got to see who your neighbors and friends are and what their interests are and what their opinions are, and hopefully that they also were very consistent with your opinions and your ideas. We're going to do more of that. We'll be coming up with an additional follow-up community-wide survey this fall that will be going out. Amanda will be directing that so that we can show you how we've changed over the last couple of years, maybe some areas that we need to continue to improve on, as well as hopefully some of the areas that we have improved on. With that, I'd like to just wrap up. But the staff and the board members and the committees of CSA and ASPPPO are working diligently and hard, not just at the day-to-day operations of getting you in and out, responding to your calls, doing the work orders that you suggest, trying to clear out the clogged drains, but we're also working on doing enhancements in managing your funds the best we can for you. This year, we're going to have several major projects that will be occurring. We'll be repaving Plantation Drive from Greenwood to Lighthouse, so that will be coming up in the fall as we get out of the season. We'll also be doing a couple of key projects. We'll be looking at engineering on the front gate and deciding what we can do and doing designs and plans for that, as well as a lot of other smaller projects throughout. Some of you may have noticed that we replaced all the bollards on the lights on the leisure paths. That happened this spring just in front of the Heritage Golf Tournament. The ones that we had were in bad shape before the storm and were in worse shape after the storm. And we think that's made a big improvement to the looks and the detail and attention that we're paying to sea pines. And with that, we hope that you who are on the webinar portion, if you do have questions after we're concluded, can get those questions into us, and we plan to get back to you within 72 hours, Amanda, on those questions that we don't answer later today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Borghese. Dave?
Thank you, Brett. Big crowd. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the members of the Finance Committee for their time and dedication. In particular, I'd like to recognize Rob Marsack, who's been with us on the Finance Committee for 6 years, and we do have term limits, and his expired, so he's off, and I'd like to welcome Jack McHenry as our newest committee member. CSA's 2016 and 2015 financial statements have been audited by the accounting firm of Elliott Davis and DeCasimo. The auditor's opinion or the report is the same as in prior years. Essentially, it's a clean report, and copies are available of the audited financial statements at your request. But also, as in the past, there were no issues or disagreements with respect to any of the accounting matters or treatments within those financial statements. I believe the essence of the important CSA financial matters are contained in the 2016 CSA annual report on pages 8 through 15. The content is similar to that of prior years, and I do not plan to spend any time on any of your valuable time discussing what is already in print. I hope you find the report to be informative, and as always, Victoria will be very happy to answer any of your questions. This year we're going to change it up, mix it up a little bit from a presentation standpoint. In the past several years I have presented some, what some might rightly say, I have droned on about charts and graphs, and for the most part they weren't very readable, so we're going to pass on that this year. Plus the fact the charts are already printed in the annual report, so you could see them there. However, this year I brought a couple of individuals to discuss investments. Investments in general, that being the current financial markets, as well as your CSA investments in particular. Why, you ask? Well, because they have been kind enough to be sponsors, and they are picking up a good portion of the tab for your cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. And let me congratulate those of you who have positioned yourself in the back of the room, because you're first out the door to get to those cocktails. So today we have Chris Richardson with us. He is a principal with the Capital Group of Companies, better known or synonymous with the American funds, which are well known and are very successful fund managers. We also have Jonathan Dixon, who is our CSA financial advisor with Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley is the firm that is the custodian of all our investments. Chris will provide an overview of the current financial markets, and Jonathan will address the current status of your CSA investments. At the end of their presentation, Victoria will provide a brief overview of where we stand at the end of the first quarter with respect to our financial position. So now I would ask that you give a very warm welcome to Chris Richardson.
Good afternoon. Dave, you're right. This is a big number of folks out here. Well, hey, I'll start out where Dave did as well, and thank you all for giving us the time to be here with you. My comments will be pretty brief on the front end, but I'll focus particularly on the fixed income and bond markets, as a majority, if not all, of the assets that are currently within the fund are held there. It's been an interesting last 40 to 50 years within the fixed income market, needless to say. I think most folks would focus on the double-digit interest rates that you experienced in the 70s and 80s, and I look around the room, probably a good number of you are relishing for those days of double digits. But I think what we'd talk about, the interesting part within the last 70 or 80 years is really the fact, the last 40 to 50 years is really the fact that what we've seen in the last 8 to 10 has been the historical norm from the United States perspective in regards to fixed income. I'm going to actually ask that you go through a couple of the first slides. The first couple slides, by the way, which are available, speak more to the U.S. equity environment and also to the international equity environment. If you go forward to page 6, I think you'll get where we're looking. Keep going. Keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Right here. So what we're showing you here on this first chart is affectionately called internally, we call it the Mona Lisa chart. It's 150 years of Fed movement, and that actually predates the Federal Reserve when it was open to market, but 150 years of movement on the 10-year Treasury. What's the anomaly here on the chart, folks? 70s and 80s, right? So, not to be the bearer of bad news in the first speaker, but if you're waiting for the double-digit returns on your CDs, money markets, and cash instruments, we could be waiting an exceptionally long period of time. What you do see before the 70s, though, are two 31 and 32-year instances, respectively, where interest rates were range-bound roughly 2 to 4%. And the interesting part, if anybody in the room is a historian, that first 30-year plus time period actually predated the Federal Reserve. So it was truly a supply and demand environment where everybody in this room got to decide where the interest rate was going to be, and still it went range-bound. Obviously, the second instance, you can draw instant parallels. You get the Great Depression, what we just experienced in 2008, some are calling the Great Recession. But very, very similar time periods, which could hint that maybe, yes, we've seen a bottom in the Treasury, and maybe we are on a way to higher levels, but it could be a very long and steady climb. So you might have heard from the financial markets a whole thesis around interest rates going up would be really bad for bond portfolios. That thesis is based on interest rates moving up very quickly. And clearly this chart highlights there's historical precedents to say it might be a very slow and long climb, maybe another 8 years, till you see an interest rate or a 10-year Treasury of 10%. But what is different this time from the previous two times shown on this chart that would lead us towards this thesis even further is actually on the next page. So what you didn't have before the 70s was really the United States, by and large, being the global currency of the world. So that's a fancy way of saying, hey, those folks that sit in Germany today, that can buy the German boon at 0.4%, think our Treasury is a deal at 2.3%. Anybody in the world can buy the 10-year Treasury, and right now you're in a phenomenon where roughly 80 to 85% of the people on planet Earth that live in a developed country like we do have a lower yield on their money than we do. So virtually anybody that sits in a developed country around the globe is envious of our 2.3%. That causes an imbalance in the supply and demand curve, and you've seen this play out as the Fed has raised rates the last couple of years, 25 basis points here or there. But if you follow Fed movement and the Treasury movement closely, what you have noticed is generally rates will go up in anticipation of a rate hike, and a couple of weeks after that rate hike, interest rates come down again. Why? It's all the increased demand globally dumping into our currency, forcing a downward pressure and keeping those rates artificially low. So what we would suggest is if things are going to reverse, if the interest rate were going to increase dramatically over the next several years, this is kind of the first thing that you really need to have happen. Our global counterparts have got to come more in line with us to relieve some of that pressure from the Fed, because right now the Fed's hands are somewhat tied. Next chart. The last part that we'll talk about here, because a low for longer time period, and notice how I choose my words very carefully. I don't think we're in a lower for longer, but we could be in a low for longer territory within the bond market. While that might not sound very interesting to most of us, including me, there are opportunities out there, particularly in the tax-exempt space and the municipal bond space. If you're familiar with paying taxes, this ought to be very interesting to a good number of folks. But what we're showing you here on this chart are basically taxable equivalent yields. If you were to go out to buy U.S. taxable bonds today, roughly 2.6%, and that number might have even come down quite a bit on the taxable bond market. So bonds that you're going to have to owe money to the government on at the end of the year. If you looked at investment-grade municipal bonds, they give you a return of 4.7%, a lot more attractive. And by the way, you don't own the federal government. You might still own state taxes, but you don't own the federal government. If you're willing to look at below investment grade, so for those of you that follow the Moody's and Standard & Poor's, you're looking below the BBB area, the opportunity set, needless to say, jumps off the chart. And all of these have moved a little bit, and they do come with some risk. There will be more interest rate volatility if you ever did see rates go up significantly within the municipal bond market. But needless to say, if you need income and you think that rates could be lower for longer and continue that historical trend that we've seen for 150 years, minus that one time period in the 70s and 80s, Munis, municipal bonds, could be an attractive area of interest. To talk specifically to what you guys have, and I think dovetails nicely into specifically how the fund is invested, I'm going to pass the microphone off to my colleague, John Dixon. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. There are a lot of people in here. I tell you what, Chris was right. I was here, spoke about 5 years ago, I believe, to this same group. And the good news is none of you look any older. So give yourselves a hand, right? So I'm here with two of my partners, Ethan Statz and Seth Deichman, from our team at Morgan Stanley up in Atlanta. We run roughly a little more than $1 billion with private client assets and then also small institutions such as insurance companies, HOAs, reserve accounts, et cetera. And it's a real honor to have your business and your trust and your confidence. So we greatly appreciate that. I'm going to go through just a little bit about what the account's done, the primary reserve account. And we can talk a little bit about how it's composed and the results and how we've done in working with your board, your finance committee specifically. And I have to tell you, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in Sea Pines right now, you have one of the best finance committees that we've seen out of our institutional clients. I mean, they are very, very sharp people. And the questions I get from them in the finance committee meetings, I mean, they're second to none. I mean, these folks really know what they're doing. And between their work and ours at Morgan Stanley, I think we've delivered a pretty good set of results for you over the years. So we'll just walk through that here. This shows total return from the investments in the reserve account. And if you look over on the far right, it shows performance since inception. The inception started in June of 2010, and this is through April. And you'll see the account's annualized net of fees at 3.16% per year. And if you go down that same column, you'll see the different indices or benchmarks. The Barclays Credit 1 to 5 year A-rated and above is at 2.77 per year. The Barclays Government Credit Intermediate is at 2.65 per year. The Barclays Muni Blend 1 to 10 year, which is all municipal bonds, is at 3. And then 6 to 9 month T-bills, which is what a lot of reserve accounts invest in, by the way. They put all the money in 6 to 9 month T-bills because it's easy, and they don't even bother with, buying individual bonds and trying to generate a higher rate of return. That's at 0.23, which is about what you would have gotten on cash. So, I'd like to just give a little hand to our finance committee and board. These are fantastic numbers. Fantastic numbers. Year to date, we're up 1.27%. We're pretty much in line with the 1 to 5 year A and above index for the year, obviously beating cash significantly. And over the past 12 months, we're at 1.69, which significantly has beaten all of those benchmarks, as has the 3 year number. So pretty strong numbers there. This shows the projected 12-month income summary. I recognize that nobody in the room can read that right now because I can barely read it either. But this is just to show you that even if we had a flat year where the account didn't really go up or down, you're generating $407,000 a year just in interest, which is pretty strong. That in itself is 3.18% on the money, just the cash flow yield. Great. And then this is a risk versus return chart. Many of you have probably seen charts like this for your own personal investments. So it's great to talk about, how you've done, how your reserves have done, but then the question of, well, what kind of risk are we taking, right? That comes up, especially in light of reserve accounts. So your account is the blue circle, which you can see is above the Barclays Government Credit 1 to 5 year index. So your return since inception is at 3.16 with a standard deviation or variance volatility measure of 1.85. That index is at 2.77 with a volatility measure of 1.81. So pretty similar risk level there, but significantly higher return on a percentage basis. And then the Barclays Government Credit Intermediate Index, which is very hard to beat actually in safe, plain vanilla, bonds, it's at 2.65 with a standard deviation of 2.21, which is still very low risk, but 2.21 is significantly more volatile than 1.85. So I think that's a good chart that just puts into perspective what kind of risk you're really taking to get that 3% rate of return, which is not a whole lot. So that's it. What questions can I answer about any of that? Oh, not now. Never mind. Hold that thought.
Hi, everyone. Boy, I can't believe it's been a year since I've been standing up here. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? Well, I'm last, and I know I'm standing between you and bacon wrapped scallops, so I'm going to make this really brief. As Dave mentioned, the results of the 2016 are all in your annual report. Amanda? I just wanted to go over our first quarter results very briefly. This is our balance sheet as of March 31st. You'll see cash and investments is that first line. I think we've heard enough about investments, so I will not go into that. The second line is our special assessment receivable. That was what was still outstanding as of March 31st. We have a due date of that of June 1st. The board has authorized an extended payment plan for an additional 4 months at 4% interest. There are worksheets here in the hallway as well as at our office. If you feel like you need to extend that payment plan, we're happy to accommodate that. Moving down, we have the liabilities, which are simply our operational liabilities. What you won't see is debt. You do not see, CSA does not have any debt. We have lines of credit available to us, but we have not gone into them. Right now they are at zero. We did go into them for Hurricane Matthew recovery. We went into it for $1.5 million, but we promptly paid that all back when the assessment revenue started coming in. We paid it all back in the first week of January. Quickly just wanted to go through a budget to actual for the first quarter. Our assessments and fees are up over budget. You'll notice that special assessment revenue. The way that accounting standards work, special assessments, you have to record it a little bit differently than regular revenue. You only record the amount of revenue for the amount of expenditures that you've had. So you see that special revenue, revenue 1.465 is exactly the same as Hurricane Matthew recovery expenses. A little bit down. There you go, right there. So it's a wash through the income statement. Wanted to give you the total assessment was $6 million approximately through April 30th, 30th, we've spent $3.9 million, leaving $2.1. Again, you'll see tree removal is still ongoing. We've yet to address the dunes issues, the beach walks, the boardwalks, or the lagoons. Unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. On other income, so you'll see that through the budget, we're kind of right where we should be. So overall, we're on target with where we need to be. Everything looks pretty strong. Thank you. Oh, and Jonathan Dixon and the Morgan Stanley information is available as you go out.
Thank you all. I think that was a pretty good meeting. Before we open the floor to questions, I need to receive a motion to adjourn our CSA meeting. And a second? Anybody want to continue? That passes. Okay, so Charlie and I and the board and committee members are available to you with questions.
The microphone.
Mike?
Stand at the microphone.
Microphone behind you.
We have two microphones up front. We do need you to come to the microphone to be heard on the webinar. So if you have questions, please approach the microphone.
I was wondering if you were going to be adding rooms to the inn, or if you were looking at other facilities to,
Would you repeat that?
oh, I was wondering if you were adding to the inn, rooms to the inn, or you were looking to acquire other properties? Because I have one suggestion. That building outside the gate that needs to be torn down would be a wonderful place to have rooms, and then it wouldn't bring all the cars in too. It would take the burden off of the parking.
CSA and ASPPPO are not acquiring any properties, and we are not building anything. Our partners, if you will, in the resort are planning an expansion of 90 rooms in and about the area of the inn. The inn itself today is 60 rooms, correct? And they are planning to add 2 other buildings in that area that will house the remaining an additional 90 rooms.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just make one other comment, too, that the town of Hilton Head has a fund to acquire properties, and that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of these park areas around. And we've been talking with Tom Lennox about acquiring that very property that's sitting out there because I think that's one of the big things we can do to mitigate the future traffic is to take property out of circulation, and that's a plan that they're looking at right now. Once again, I know that there are a lot of people here that must have some questions on their mind, and we do have 2 microphones, one here and one there. So if you have a question, please stand up and ask the question. Otherwise, the answer will be hors d'oeuvres. I can't believe it.
Wow. We did an incredible.
You sure? Well, thank you all for coming, and the cocktails and hors d'oeuvres are right outside the door there.